This particular unit is referring to the appearance of Mary Queen of Scots and the Northern Rebellion, the Ridolfi plot, the Throckmorton plot, and the Babington plot, and how all these threats to Elizabeth's government affected the nation. Mary Queen of Scots was brought up in France. She had been brought up as a Catholic, came to Scotland, had a pretty disastrous reign. Scotland by this time had become Protestant, and she had to, after a civil war, flee to England to escape being captured. Elizabeth in 1568 did not need to have her cousin appear on her doorstep, especially as she was an obvious heir to the throne, whilst Elizabeth had no children. And as she was a Catholic, she was an obvious source for Catholic plots. And that was what was going to happen. The first of these was in 1569, and it's called the Northern Rebellion. It was poorly organised, and it really revolved around the fact that Robert Dudley felt left out and threatened by the preeminence of William Cecil in the government, and the Duke of Norfolk felt again that he hadn't been given the sort of recognition that he deserved, and as a result the idea was to get a situation where Mary was released and married the Duke of Norfolk, and as it were, Cecil was replaced. In the end, Robert Dudley confessed what was going on to his friend Elizabeth, and the plot fell apart. However, there was a military rising in the north to support this plot, but it again was not properly organised, and the result was that it was crushed and Elizabeth survived. Well, the following year, in 1570, the Pope issues a papal bull, which effectively means that Catholics are no longer obliged to obey Elizabeth, and that she is, as it were, excommunicated from the church. This makes the whole situation even more dangerous for Elizabeth. Now it would seem that Roman Catholics could legitimately, according to their faith, disobey Elizabeth and ultimately assassinate her without any fear of moral reprobation. Well, the first plot that takes place is the Ridolfi plot of 1571. This plot was an attempt by the Spanish to land under the Duke of Alba in Essex, but Elizabeth by now has, under Walsingham, got quite a good spy network. And one of the consequences of all these plots was, in fact, this rigorous spy system that Elizabeth had to devise to find out these plots before they hatched. The next plot, and of course this plot, the Ridolfi plot, fails. Walsingham finds out about it, and the Duke of Norfolk is executed. The next plot of significance is the Throckmorton plot of 1583. Again, is an attempt by France and Spain to land forces in this country, and on the assumption that the Catholics would rise up. Again, Elizabeth finds out about this plot through Walsingham's agents, and it is foiled. But this confirms that Mary, Queen of Scots, is posing a continued threat to Elizabeth. However, Elizabeth does not want to bring about the execution of Mary. I think there are two reasons for this. Firstly, Mary is royalty, and Elizabeth does not want to be accused of murdering a royal, because if you murder one royal, why can't you murder another or execute them? The second reason is political. She fears that if she executes Mary, Queen of Scots, she might give even more impetus to a Catholic power, particularly Spain, to legitimately come and invade this country, England, because of the regicide that's taken place. In the end, the final plot is the Babington plot of 1586. Mary, Queen of Scots, is clearly implicated in this plot. Walsingham has all the evidence, and Elizabeth is forced, against her better nature, to sign the death warrant for Mary, Queen of Scots. However, she does protest that she never actually sent it to be carried out. She merely signed it awaiting a time to send it, and that it was her councillors who had gone against her will in carrying out the execution. Whether Elizabeth has been totally honest in this, I don't know. Certainly, it might have looked good in European circles to have Elizabeth complaining bitterly she never meant to execute her cousin, and that it was just her councillors going behind her back. The fact is, within a year of 1587, when the execution takes place, in 1588, the Armada will be set sail to attack England. And therefore, Elizabeth's fears were justified that the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, would cause that response. What we learn from these is that this whole period of history, when Mary, Queen of Scots, was in the country and these rebellions were taking place, resulted in a quite extensive spy network being set up under Walsingham. It resulted in increasing restrictions on Catholics as they became more and more looked upon as being potential traitors. And so Elizabeth's original plan to have a more tolerant approach, where she wasn't going to have a window into people's souls, was not capable of being carried through. And so one sees increasingly through her reign greater and greater restrictions on Roman Catholics. From a Christ-centered perspective, what do we learn from this? That we should pray for our leaders. To be the head of any government is an extraordinarily difficult job. And what God requires of leaders is that they rule justly, they do not oppress the poor, but they also bring security, because he's given the sword to the state to judge the wicked and to protect us from invasions. Walsingham and Elizabeth, through this period, had to carry out what they did in order to provide security. And in some ways, from a Christ-centered perspective, they were right to do the things they did. Should they have been so heavy-handed against the Roman Catholics? They possibly could have been less heavy-handed. But at the end of the day, it's very difficult to judge a nation under threat, as England was, with the benefit of hindsight. It's always a delicate matter. How much do you sacrifice personal freedoms for security? We saw this with the COVID-19. We sacrificed an awful lot of personal freedoms for security against an illness. And therefore, I think if you're going to judge the past, you must do so with a sense of proportion, a sense of humility, a sense of fairness to the people concerned. And you must be careful not to over-moralise. I think in the end of the day, Elizabeth tried to run the country on this issue as best she could without being too heavy-handed. Whether she could have done better, God will be able to judge her. I don't think it's fair for us to judge. Ultimately, God is the judge of rulers as well as individuals.